Speaker, and it's been a genuine pleasure to be part of this evening's debate, and I congratulate my right honourable friend for Holton Price and Howden in his absence for securing it. I'd also like to pay particular tribute to the honourable gentleman for Stretford and Urmston for what I thought was a exemplary speech in which I really couldn't find anything to disagree, and I say that with deep admiration. We must confront the stark reality that we are facing a severe shortfall in our housing because of the policy choices of successive governments, a dearth of political leadership at both local and national level, and a lack of honesty with the public about the consequences every time a member of this House or a local councillor or a local campaign group celebrate blocking new homes. The Centre for Cities estimates that our shortfall is as great as 4.3 million homes, and that crisis is stunting our economic growth. It's leaving young people without the space to start a family, and it's trapping renters in unsafe accommodation. It would take us some 50 years at our aimed for build rate of 300,000 homes a year to put this right, and we are not getting anywhere near that build rate. And of course, historically, we did so much better. Home ownership was a moral mission for the Macmillan government, and it may not have escaped colleagues on this side of the House his attention that his achievements, of course, underpinned his huge election victory in 1959 in the way that Mrs Thatcher won huge support through her right to buy policy. The contrast with the 1960s could hardly be more stark. In that decade, we built 3.6 million more homes, more than we've built in total since the turn of the century. And we've created a supply and demand feedback loop of the worst possible kind. I'm afraid that I must take issue with the Honourable Lady from North Shropshire when she says that the planning system isn't the problem. I'm afraid it is the problem. It is fundamentally broken, and it is what's driving the fact that someone buying their first home now faces paying 9 times their income for it. In the 1980s, it was just 3 times the average salary. I will give way.
Grateful to him for giving way. I'd just like to clarify, it's not the only problem. We give planning permission for all these houses, but we don't build them, and we need to address the build-out problem as well as the planning issue problem.
I think the issue of land banking is something of a straw man in these debates, because I've never seen compelling evidence that it happens. I think that the reality is that developers need a land supply, predictable land supply, in order to have a programme of forward build, and that is what largely accounts for that question. I'm also very conscious that it is, I'm afraid to say, and I don't want to make this a starkly political debate, often her party who are the worst offenders when it comes to campaigning cynically against the development that we need. And I'd refer colleagues across the House to the Cheshire and Amersham by-election a few years ago to see just how detrimental that policy has been in terms of the wider debate. Indeed, arguably, it was that election result which led to the disastrous removal of targets, which I think is what's driving tonight's debate in the first place. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Thank you. He talks about the planning system being the problem and not land banking per se. Does he accept the figures from Lichfield that shows from getting planning permission it takes 8.5 years for a first house to be built on a large housing estate, and on average a large housing estate is built out by developers. A 2,000 home housing estate is built out at a rate of 160 homes a year, according to Lichfield, and it takes the best part of 2 decades to build out a 2,000 home housing estate. Is he really saying that the development industry isn't the problem?
I think it is much more about the developers seeking to make sure that they can sell the homes that they need, that they're building, and it's much more also about them having the supply of land available to them predictably to allow them to build into the future, and they obviously are very constrained at the moment by the scarcity of supply. The consequence of where we find ourselves, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that the last time house prices were this expensive relative to earnings was, according to Schroeder's, 1876, the year Victoria became Empress of India, and that should make us all reflect what kind of society we have become. Now, I believe part of the problem is clearly that we need to control immigration more strictly, and I believe strongly that the numbers announced just before recess were unsustainably high. But this is fundamentally a homegrown problem. Our society does not build the homes that we need to accommodate our existing population, and therefore we need to establish clear targets for housing supply. Doing so is not some kind of Stalinist 5-year plan. It is the best way we have yet identified to prevent councils from backsliding on their responsibilities and caving in to what are often small, if noisy, pressure groups. And it's my view that the regrettable decision taken by the Prime Minister last year to weaken those targets by removing their legal force was a mistake, which has already had far-reaching consequences. Now, I'm quite prepared to have a sensible debate about how we set our housing targets. We could change our approach and take as our starting point the existing occupied housing stock of an area and apply a rate at which it should be increased, in line with the national home building target of 300,000 homes a year. Urban areas would see the highest levels of need, allowing a brownfield-focused policy, and no part of the country would be seen as being asked to contribute more than their fair share. This stock leg starting point for a standard method would remove reliance on discredited housing projections, and you could nuance it, of course, with carve-outs for ANOBs, SSSIs, high concentrations of homes for holiday lets, or indeed where historic drivers of demand like university expansion have ceased to exist. But one thing I would say is that we cannot insist that the Greenbelt should be out of bounds wholly and completely, which is something that the Prime Minister implied recently. The Greenbelt was a 1940s mechanism to prevent urban expansion, pretty crudely drawn on the map. It is not, and I repeat, not a sophisticated environmental protection measure. It is, however, the beneficiary of really effective branding. We have to raise awareness that about 11% of our brownfield land actually lies within the Greenbelt, and that 35% of the Greenbelt is intensive agricultural land of minimal environmental significance. The public deserve to know this, perhaps by designating areas of the Greenbelt that don't have genuine environmental value as orange or amber belt, capable of being developed in exchange for substitution elsewhere. There are other things I could talk about. We could talk about the onerous nutrient neutrality rules, which are blocking huge swathes of housing from the Solent up to Darlington. I see my honourable friend the Minister nodding from her position at the dispatch box. I urge the government to act on this. I think there could be a grand bargain whereby we carve home building out of the HABS regs in exchange for more robust action on the actual polluters, that is to say, our water companies and bad farming practice. And I will say no more on that. I will add that we also need, of course, as we've heard from my honourable friend from Carlisle, the appropriate infrastructure to make sure that new developments succeed, and that's certainly something I want to see in Colby Newham in my constituency, where new homes are now in contemplation at scale. I agree with my right honourable friend from North West Hampshire on the importance of aesthetics. We need to build beautifully to win the argument with communities about the fact that we can actually build well. And I also agree with my right honourable friend from Holton, Price and Howden about new garden towns and cities. Where is the ambition that led to Welwyn Garden City or Milton Keynes today? It is absolutely vital that we try and concentrate developments where they can make the most difference, which will often, of course, be around the capital. My final point, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I crave your indulgence on this, is that this is a cross-party issue. It is an area where we need to work together, not to take cynical advantage where politicians or councils of the opposite party try and do the right thing, because it is the easiest campaign in the world to fight new house building. It is against the interests of this country. We risk becoming a profoundly unequal society, fractured on the twin fault lines of low home ownership and unaffordable rents for cramped, undesirable properties. That is not progress. That isn't something of which any of us can be proud. I do sense the mood in the House is changing on this question. I profoundly hope that government policy will follow suit.